Carl Jung's most disturbing discovery wasn't about mental illness or trauma. It was about people who absorbed the emotional states of everyone around them like a psychic sponge. And why this rare ability doesn't make you compassionate, it makes you a target. In 1916, Jung documented a woman who walked into crowded rooms and immediately felt crushed by invisible weight. She couldn't explain it, but within minutes, she'd know exactly who was grieving, who was lying, who carried hidden rage. She didn't read body language. She didn't analyze behavior. She felt it all inside her own nervous system. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you were drowning in emotions that weren't yours? Like your body was picking up radio signals you never asked to receive? You're standing in a grocery store checkout line, and suddenly you feel crushing sadness. There's no reason for it. Nothing in your life triggered it. But it's there heavy in your chest, making it hard to breathe. Or maybe you've lain awake at 3 in the morning feeling panic that doesn't belong to you. Your life is fine. Everything is manageable. But your heart is racing, your thoughts are spiraling, and you have no idea why. Then you find out later your neighbor was having a crisis, through the wall, while you were trying to sleep. Jung called this psychic infection, and he discovered it wasn't empathy at all. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. This patient couldn't hold a job. She'd walk into an office and absorb the boss's anxiety, the co-worker's resentment, the client's fear. By noon, she'd be physically ill from emotions that weren't even hers. Friends called her too sensitive. Family said she was making it up. Doctors found nothing wrong, but Jung recognized something they didn't. This wasn't sensitivity. This was participation mystique, a dangerous blurring of psychological boundaries that ancient humans used for survival. And in modern society, it's destroying people. You thought you were broken, didn't you? Too emotional, too reactive, unable to cope with what everyone else handles just fine. You've probably been told to toughen up, to stop taking things so personally, to just get over it. Maybe you've wondered if something is fundamentally wrong with you. Here's the truth that will change everything. You're not broken. You're not too sensitive. You're not failing at being human. You're doing exactly what you evolved to do. But you're doing it in a world that has completely forgotten how to honor that function. Because this patient's experience seemed impossible, Jung began investigating the actual mechanism. What he found changed everything we thought we knew about empathy, consciousness, and the invisible architecture of human connection. Your brain has mirror neurons that fire when you observe emotions in others. Normal people experience this as mild empathy, a gentle resonance, like hearing an echo. But Jung discovered some individuals, roughly 2% of the population, have what he called dissolved ego boundaries. You don't just mirror emotions, you become them. Jung wrote, "The patient experiences no separation between self and other. The psychic atmosphere enters directly unfiltered. This isn't a gift. It's a survival mechanism that never turned off." What if I told you that empaths aren't too sensitive for this world, but psychologically ahead of it? What if the trait that's caused you so much suffering is actually an ancient function that modern society simply doesn't understand anymore? Jung didn't just study this phenomenon from a distance. He lived it. During what he called his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1916, Jung himself experienced dissolved boundaries. He felt as if he were in the land of the dead. Everything he encountered entered his psyche directly, without filter, without protection. He thought he was going insane, but he was actually discovering the mechanism that would help thousands of people understand why they feel everything so intensely. And what he mapped during those years of personal crisis became the roadmap for transformation. Not from sensitivity to numbness, but from suffering to sacred function, from victim to conscious mediator. Because Jung lived through this himself, he could see what no other psychologist of his time could see. He understood that what looks like pathology is actually an evolutionary remnant. What appears to be dysfunction is actually an ancient capacity that we've simply lost the cultural containers to hold. You're about to discover what's actually happening in your nervous system when you walk into a room and feel crushed, why you can't hold a job in certain environments, why crowds leave you completely depleted, why you always seem to be the one people confess to even when you barely know them. And more importantly, you're going to learn the exact 4-stage process Jung developed to transform from psychic sponge to conscious navigator, from emotional dumping ground to bridge between worlds. But first, you need to understand what's really happening inside your body when you absorb someone else's grief on the subway. Here's what's actually happening in your nervous system. Most people have what Jung called the differentiating function, a psychological membrane that separates self from other. It's like having a wetsuit in the ocean. You feel the water, you sense the temperature, but you don't become waterlogged. But participation mystique individuals lack this membrane. Jung observed this in session after session. One patient described walking past a homeless person and immediately feeling bone-deep cold and hunger that weren't hers. Another felt her neighbor's panic attack through the apartment wall at 3 in the morning. A third absorbed his therapist's grief during sessions and carried it for days. Jung realized this wasn't imagination or suggestion. The autonomic nervous system in these individuals was literally processing external emotional data as if it were internal. Your body can't tell the difference between your anxiety and the stranger's anxiety standing next to you on the subway. Think about that for a moment. Your nervous system is designed to keep you safe by monitoring threat. But when your boundaries are dissolved, you're not just monitoring your own threat level, you're monitoring everyone's. Your system is trying to process the fear of the person next to you, the rage of someone across the room, the grief of a stranger you passed on the street. And it's doing all of this without your conscious permission. Jung identified 3 specific dangers of participation mystique. And if you've ever felt emotionally hijacked by a room full of strangers, you need to understand all 3. Danger 1. Identity dissolution. You lose track of which feelings are yours. Jung documented patients who developed symptoms of illnesses they didn't have simply from being near sick people. One woman developed phantom pregnancy symptoms after visiting her pregnant sister for 3 days. She wasn't consciously mimicking. Her body was responding to the hormonal and emotional field of her sister. Another man felt chest pain for weeks, convinced he was having heart problems. Every medical test came back normal. Doctors thought it was anxiety. Then he discovered his neighbor, a man he rarely spoke to, was being treated for a heart condition. The chest pain stopped the day the neighbor recovered. Jung's clinical notes reveal the participation mystique individual becomes a tuning fork for the suffering of others. Their body resonates with frequencies that aren't their own. Your nervous system can't distinguish between self and other. And over time, you start to wonder, who am I when I'm alone? Do I even have my own feelings, or am I just a collection of everyone else's emotional debris? This is the terror that most empaths carry in secret. The fear that there's no core self underneath all the absorption. That if you stopped feeling everyone else's pain, there would be nothing left. Danger 2, energetic depletion. Every person you encounter is an involuntary drain on your system. Jung observed, the participation mystique individual gives away their libido involuntarily to every person and place. But it's worse than that. You're not just giving energy, you're processing energy. Think of yourself as a water filtration system. Everyone else's emotional toxins pass through you. You walk into a grocery store with full energy. You pass the stressed cashier, the angry customer, the grieving woman in the produce section, the anxious teenager stocking shelves, the overwhelmed parent with screaming children. You leave feeling like you've run a marathon. because you have been. You've been processing the emotional data of 50 people without your consent. One of Jung's patients described it perfectly. I feel like I'm doing everyone else's psychological homework. And you are. You're metabolizing their rage so they don't have to feel it. You're carrying their grief so they can stay functional. You're processing their fear so they can sleep at night. Meanwhile, you're the one who can't sleep. You're the one who feels inexplicably exhausted. You're the one who needs 3 days alone after a single social event just to feel like yourself again. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. Danger 3. The scapegoat effect. Groups unconsciously identify participation mystique individuals and use them as emotional dumping grounds. Jung wrote about a patient who was always the one people confessed to. Strangers on trains told her their darkest secrets. Co-workers shared problems they'd never discussed with anyone else. Even casual acquaintances felt compelled to unload their trauma onto her. She thought she was being helpful. She thought it meant people trusted her. But Jung recognized the pattern. The group was using her dissolved boundaries to purge their own shadow material. She was becoming the community's psychological sewage system. Here's the mechanism. People unconsciously sense your lack of boundaries. They feel the permeability, and their psyche recognizes an opportunity to offload what they don't want to carry. It's not malicious. It's not even conscious. But it's happening. They walk away feeling lighter. You're left carrying their rage, shame, and terror. Jung documented one particularly disturbing case. A man worked in an office where everyone seemed unusually cheerful and productive. But he felt increasingly suicidal for no apparent reason. His life was fine. His relationships were good. But the feeling persisted. During therapy, Jung realized the man was absorbing all the suppressed depression and rage of his 30 co-workers. They stayed functional by unconsciously using him as an emotional landfill. He was carrying their darkness so they didn't have to. Are you starting to recognize yourself in these patterns at the unexplained exhaustion, the physical symptoms that have no medical cause, the feeling that you're everyone's therapist even though you never signed up for the job? But Jung discovered something even more disturbing about why certain people developed this trait in the first place. And it has nothing to do with being born sensitive. Jung traced participation mystique back to a specific childhood survival strategy. If you grew up in an emotionally volatile or unpredictable environment, your child brain made a calculation. To survive, you needed to predict emotional weather. So your nervous system dissolved its boundaries and became a radar system. You learned to feel your parents' mood before they walked in the door. You sensed tension before the argument started. You absorbed your siblings' pain to prevent family rupture. Jung documented this in multiple case studies. One patient remembered age 4 standing at the top of the stairs, feeling into the emotional field downstairs to determine if it was safe to come down. That's not empathy. That's a child becoming an early warning system for emotional danger. Jung identified 3 critical windows where participation mystique forms. Ages 2 to 4, the boundary formation window. This is when most children develop a sense of me versus not me. But if your primary caregiver was emotionally unpredictable, your brain made a different choice. Instead of forming strong boundaries, it kept them dissolved to monitor threat. One patient described her mother's mood swings as emotional weather I had to predict to avoid the storm. By age 3, she could feel her mother's irritation from another room. This saved her from punishments, but it trained her nervous system to remain permanently open. Ages 5 to 8, the empathy reinforcement window. If your dissolved boundaries successfully protected you, they got reinforced. Jung noted, the child receives positive feedback for their hypervigilance. The family unconsciously rewards the emotional radar. You became the one who could always tell when something was wrong. Parents praised you for being so sensitive, so caring. But what they were really praising was your survival mechanism. You weren't being sensitive by choice. You were being sensitive because your life depended on reading the room. Ages 9 to 12. The identity confusion window. This is when most children solidify their sense of self. But participation mystique children experience something different. You don't know where you end and others begin. One patient told Jung, "I thought everyone felt this way. I didn't know other people could walk through a crowd without absorbing everything." By adolescence, you're so used to feeling others' emotions that you've never developed a relationship with your own. Jung connected participation mystique to what modern psychology now calls disorganized attachment. When your caregiver is both the source of comfort and the source of fear, your nervous system can't develop healthy boundaries. You need to stay open to monitor danger, but you also need to stay open to receive love. So you never develop the ability to close. Jung wrote, "The child with dissolved boundaries is trying to solve an impossible equation: how to remain safe while remaining connected to an unsafe person. The answer their nervous system finds: absorb everything, so nothing catches you by surprise. Because you successfully predicted emotional danger as a child, your brain maintained dissolved boundaries into adulthood, and now you're walking through the world as an emotional antenna that can't be switched off. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Jung himself experienced participation mystique during his Red Book period from 1913 to 1916. Most people don't know this part of his story. After his break with Freud, Jung entered what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. He wrote, "I felt as if I were in the land of the dead. Everything I encountered entered my psyche directly." He documented absorbing the collective psychological atmosphere of pre-World War I Europe. He felt the coming violence before it manifested. He experienced what he called invasion by the objective psyche. In his private notes, Jung described walking through Zurich and being overwhelmed by visions of blood and destruction. This was 1913. The war hadn't started yet. But Jung was picking up on the collective unconscious, preparing for catastrophe. He thought he was going insane. His dissolved boundaries were absorbing the psychic tension of an entire continent moving toward war. Jung wrote, "I could not distinguish my own thoughts from what was streaming into me from the collective." He experienced months of psychological chaos. But here's the critical insight: Jung wasn't just studying this phenomenon. He was living it. And his breakthrough came when he realized participation mystique wasn't a disorder to be cured. It was an undifferentiated perception that needed to be integrated. He developed techniques not to shut down his sensitivity, but to create conscious boundaries around it. By 1916, he'd mapped the complete transformation process, not from theory, but from his own survival. Because Jung lived through this himself, he mapped something nobody else could see: the 4 distinct types of participation mystique. And understanding which type you are changes everything about how you protect yourself. Type 1. The emotional sponge. You absorb ambient emotional atmosphere. Walk into a room, immediately feel the collective mood. Jung observed, "These individuals become the emotional barometer of any group. You might not know what each person is feeling individually, but you feel the field they create together." One patient described entering a meeting where everyone was smiling and professional, but she felt a thickness in the air, like invisible fog. 20 minutes later, the meeting erupted into conflict. She'd felt the suppressed tension before anyone expressed it. Type 1 individuals often struggle in crowds, concerts, malls, airports. It's not just overstimulation, you're processing the collective emotional output of hundreds of people simultaneously. Jung noted, Type 1s are often drawn to nature where the emotional field is less complex. Does this sound like you? Do you feel worse in crowds than in one-on-one interactions? Does being in public spaces drain you even when nobody directly interacts with you? Type 2, the direct channel. You don't feel general atmosphere. You lock onto specific individuals and feel their exact emotional state. One of Jung's patients described it as an invisible cord connecting her nervous system to others. She couldn't be in the same room as someone in pain without experiencing that exact pain in her own body. This type is particularly vulnerable in one-on-one relationships. You might finish other people's sentences because you're feeling their thoughts form. You might know your partner is upset before they do. Type 2s often become therapists, nurses, counselors, not because they chose helping professions, but because their nervous system was already doing the work. Jung documented a case of a woman who felt her best friend's miscarriage, the exact cramping pain and grief, while they were in different cities. She called to check on her friend. The miscarriage had happened 3 hours earlier. Do you form intense, energetic connections with specific people? Do you know what someone is feeling even when they're hiding it successfully from everyone else? Type 3. The psychic projector. This is the most dangerous type. Not only do you feel others' emotions, but your own emotions leak out and affect the people around you. Jung wrote, "The psychic projector creates the very atmosphere they then absorb, completing a closed loop of psychological infection." If you've ever noticed people become anxious around you when you're anxious or depressed when you're depressed, this is you. One patient realized she was causing her husband's insomnia. Her unprocessed anxiety was radiating outward at night. He'd wake up with her anxiety in his body, even though she seemed calm. Type 3s are often accused of being toxic or draining, but you're not intentionally affecting others. Your emotions are leaking through your dissolved boundaries. Jung observed that Type 3s often have chronic relationship problems because their unprocessed shadow material infects everyone close to them. The solution isn't to suppress your emotions, it's to develop boundaries that contain them. Do people often mirror your emotional state back to you? Do your moods seem to spread to others around you? Type 4, the collective unconscious antenna. This is the rarest type Jung documented. You don't just feel individual emotions or group atmosphere. You pick up on the archetypal and collective psychological currents. Jung experienced this himself before World War I, feeling what he called the blood of Europe rising. You might feel historical echoes in old buildings, sense cultural trauma in certain locations, pick up on species-level anxiety about climate technology or social collapse. One patient described visiting Auschwitz and being physically incapacitated by what she called the weight of collective death. Another felt overwhelming dread every September 11th, even decades after 2001. Jung noted, "These individuals are living seismographs of the collective psyche." Type 4s are often drawn to shamanic traditions, depth psychology, spiritual practices, because conventional psychology can't explain their experience. You're not just feeling individual emotions. You're feeling the unconscious movements of entire cultures and historical periods. Do you feel emotions connected to places, not just people? Do you pick up on cultural or historical energy that others don't notice? Most participation mystique individuals are a combination of types, but one will be dominant. Knowing your type helps you understand which protective practices will work best for you. But here's what Jung discovered about the true purpose of participation mystique and why you might be psychologically ahead of your time. Jung realized participation mystique wasn't a bug in human psychology. It was an ancient feature. Early humans needed individuals who could sense emotional and psychological danger for the tribe. The shaman, the medicine person, the one who felt into the invisible realm. Jung wrote, In archaic societies, participation mystique individuals were honored as bridges between the conscious and unconscious worlds. In traditional cultures, people with dissolved boundaries underwent intensive training. They learned techniques to control their permeability. They learned to open and close their boundaries at will. They learned to process what they absorbed without being destroyed by it. And they were given a role in the community. They performed rituals to cleanse what they'd absorbed. They acted as emotional mediators during conflicts. They sensed when the tribe was in danger from invisible forces. But here's the problem. Modern society has no role for you. We don't have rituals that honor your dissolved boundaries. We don't have containers that protect you while you serve this function. We don't even have language for what you do. So instead, you're labeled as too sensitive, overly emotional, unable to cope, attention-seeking. When the truth is, you're doing exactly what you evolved to do. You're just doing it in a world that doesn't understand it. This is the grief many empaths carry without naming it. You feel like a stranger in your own culture. Like you were born in the wrong time. Like there's no place for you in modern life. But the truth is, you weren't born in the wrong time. The culture lost the containers, not the other way around. Jung identified what he called the empathy trap in modern society. Because we've lost the shamanic container participation mystique, individuals fall into three predictable patterns. Pattern 1. The helper addiction. You become a therapist to everyone in your life, not professionally, just through sheer proximity. People feel better after being around you because you've absorbed their pain. Jung noted, the helper addict confuses their absorption of others' suffering with virtue. You think you're being compassionate, but you're actually being used as an emotional processing plant. What do you get from absorbing others' pain? Does being needed protect you from something else? Maybe from being truly known, maybe from facing your own inner world. Pattern 2. The isolation response. You withdraw completely from society. You avoid crowds, decline invitations, minimize human contact. You think you're protecting yourself. But Jung observed, isolation doesn't develop boundaries. It confirms their absence. When you're alone, you never learn to manage your permeability. You just avoid the problem. Have you ever noticed that the longer you isolate, the harder it becomes to be around people? That's because your boundaries aren't getting stronger, they're actually getting weaker from lack of practice. Pattern 3. The numbing strategy. You use substances, food media, or work to dull your sensitivity. Anything to stop feeling so much. Jung documented multiple patients who developed addictions specifically to quiet their participation mystique. One patient said, alcohol was the only thing that gave me boundaries. But numbing doesn't solve the problem, just postpones the integration work. And often it makes things worse because now you're dealing with both dissolved boundaries and the consequences of the numbing behavior. Because modern society lacks containers for participation mystique, you've been suffering with a gift that has no place to land. But Jung didn't just identify the problem. He mapped the exact path of integration. Let me tell you about the woman from 1916, the one who felt crushed in crowded rooms. Jung worked with her for 3 years, using the exact framework I'm about to share with you. First, she learned to recognize which emotions were hers through daily inventory. She discovered that 70% of what she felt belonged to others. Then she developed conscious boundaries through visualization and intention setting. She practiced the membrane technique before entering any space. Third, she did the shadow work Jung prescribed. She discovered she'd been using her absorption of others as a way to avoid her own rage toward her parents. As long as she was feeling everyone else's emotions, she didn't have to feel her own. This was the hardest stage. It took her 18 months to face what she'd been running from. But once she integrated her shadow, everything changed. She could finally sense without absorbing. She could be in crowds without becoming the crowd. And she eventually became one of Jung's assistant analysts, not despite her participation mystique because of it. She could sense what patients couldn't articulate. She could feel into the unconscious material before it surfaced. But now, she did it consciously protected with choice. Jung wrote in his notes, she transformed from victim of the psychic atmosphere to conscious navigator of it. The last entry in her case file from 1928. Patient reports she now understands her sensitivity as sacred function. She no longer suffers from it. She serves through it. If she could do it, so can you. Jung called it the development of conscious boundaries through shadow work. Here are the 4 stages he documented, and this is based on his clinical work with dozens of patients, plus his own transformation. Stage 1. Recognition and inventory. You must first recognize that most feelings you experience aren't yours. This sounds simple. It's revolutionary. Jung had patients keep an emotional inventory for 30 days. Every time you feel something, ask 3 questions. When did this feeling start? Was I near someone or someplace when it started? Does this feeling match anything in my actual life circumstances? One patient discovered she felt suicidal every Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon. Nothing in her life was triggering this. Then she realized that's when her neighbor, visible through the window, came home from chemotherapy. She was absorbing her neighbor's death anxiety. Once she recognized the pattern, the suicidal feelings lost their power. She could say, "This isn't mine. This belongs to someone else's experience. I witness it, but I don't carry it." Most people in participation mystique are shocked to discover that 60 to 80% of their daily emotional experience belongs to others. Jung wrote, "Recognition is the first boundary. Naming what is not self begins the differentiation process." Here's a practice that will change your life. Every morning before leaving your home, take inventory of your baseline emotional state. Rate yourself on a simple scale: calm, anxious, sad, energized, whatever you're genuinely feeling. Then throughout the day, notice when that baseline shifts. Most participation mystique individuals go from calm to anxious, to depressed, to irritated, without any actual life events triggering the shifts. You're just absorbing the emotional weather around you. But once you start recognizing the pattern, you can name it. I was calm this morning. I walked into the coffee shop, and now I'm anxious. The anxiety started when I stood behind that person in line. This isn't my anxiety. That simple recognition creates the first thread of separation between self and other. Stage 2. Boundary formation through visualization. This doesn't mean shutting down your sensitivity. It means developing what Jung called conscious permeability. You learn to feel without absorbing, to sense without taking on, to witness without carrying. Jung taught patients to visualize a membrane porous enough to sense, strong enough to protect. He used the metaphor of a wetsuit. Water touches your skin, you feel the temperature, but you don't become waterlogged. One technique Jung developed before entering any space: consciously state an intention. I sense but do not absorb. I witness but do not carry. This seems too simple to work. But Jung found that conscious intention activates what he called the differentiating function. Your psyche begins creating a boundary that didn't exist before. Here's the practice. Stand in your doorway before leaving home. Visualize a membrane of light surrounding your body. Imagine it as porous information can pass through, but it doesn't stick. Then speak your intention out loud. I will sense the world around me, but I will not absorb what isn't mine. One patient reported, "The first time I did this, I walked through a hospital without feeling like I was dying. I could still sense the suffering, but it didn't enter my body. The membrane isn't about building walls. It's about creating conscious permeability. You're still open, still sensing, still empathic, but you're no longer being invaded. Practice this daily for 2 weeks. Before you go to work, visualize the membrane. Before you enter a social gathering, state your intention. Before you walk into a grocery store, remind your nervous system, I sense, but do not absorb. You'll be amazed at how much energy you retain. But visualization alone isn't enough. You must face what you've been avoiding. Stage 3, shadow integration. This is the deepest work. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Jung discovered that participation mystique individuals often have an unconscious need to merge with others. Why? Because you're terrified of your own emotional intensity. So you hide from your own feelings by focusing on everyone else's. Jung wrote, "The participation mystique patient must learn to contain their own psychic intensity before they can develop healthy boundaries." This is the stage most people skip, and it's why they never develop real boundaries. You have to turn your perception inward. Feel your own rage, grief, desire, shadow material, not avoiding it by becoming an emotional service station for others. Jung had patients spend 30 minutes daily with their own emotions. No distractions, no absorption of others, no helping anyone, just sitting with what arose from within. For participation mystique individuals, this is terrifying. One patient said, "I realized I've been running from my own feelings my entire life. Other people's emotions were easier to deal with than my own." Why? Because your own rage is more frightening than a stranger's sadness. Your own grief is more overwhelming than someone else's anxiety. Your own desire is more threatening than managing everyone else's needs. So you become the helper, the empath, the sensitive one, not because you're naturally compassionate, but because it's safer than facing your own inner world. Jung developed specific questions to reveal your hidden motives. What do I get from absorbing others' pain? How does being needed protect me from being truly known? What would I have to face about myself if I stopped focusing on everyone else? These questions reveal the uncomfortable truth. Participation mystique isn't just happening to you. Part of you is choosing it because it's safer than confronting your own inner world. This is Carl Jung empath work at its deepest level. That the realization that your sensitivity isn't just a gift or a burden, but sometimes a defense mechanism against your own psyche. Maybe you absorb others' pain, because when you're carrying their grief, you don't have to face your own. Maybe you become everyone's therapist, because being needed feels safer than being vulnerable. Maybe you stay focused on external emotional weather because the storm inside you feels too dangerous to navigate. The shadow work requires brutal honesty. Sit with these questions. Journal about them. Don't perform the answers you think you should have. Feel into the real truth. One patient discovered that her constant absorption of others' emotions was actually rage at her parents for not protecting her as a child. She was so angry, but anger wasn't allowed in her family. So she learned to feel everyone else's emotions instead. Decades later, she was still running from that childhood rage. When she finally faced it, really felt it, screamed it, let it move through her body, her participation mystique transformed. She could suddenly hold boundaries because she wasn't running anymore. The shadow work might take months, it might take years, but it's the only path to real transformation. Because once you've faced your own inner world, other people's emotions stop being a place to hide. Stage 4, sacred function and conscious service. Once you've integrated your shadow and developed conscious boundaries, participation mystique transforms. You're no longer a victim of your sensitivity. You become what Jung called a consciousness mediator. You can sense collective psychological movements and help others understand them. You can feel into group dynamics and facilitate healing. You can pick up on what's unspoken and give it voice, but now you're doing it consciously, with choice, with protection. Jung documented several patients who became therapists, mediators, spiritual teachers after completing this integration. Not because they stopped feeling everything, but because they learned to work with their gift instead of being destroyed by it. This is where personal development meets ancient wisdom, when you stop fighting your nature and start channeling it with consciousness. You know you've integrated participation mystique when you can walk into a room and sense the atmosphere, but you don't become it. You can sit with someone in pain without taking on their pain. You can choose when to open your boundaries and when to close them. You feel your own emotions clearly distinct from others. You use your sensitivity in service, not survival. Jung noted, the integrated participation mystique individual becomes a bridge translating unconscious material into conscious understanding for others. You're not here to absorb everyone's pain. You're here to help make the invisible visible, to name what others can't articulate, to sense where collective healing needs to happen. But you can only do this work when you're no longer drowning in the psychic atmosphere yourself. The transformation from stage 1 to stage 4 doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of deepening self-awareness, consistent practice, and patient shadow work. But the path exists. Jung walked it himself. His patients walked it. And thousands of people since have discovered that the sensitivity that nearly destroyed them became their greatest gift once they learned to contain it. You cannot do this work alone. Jung identified 3 types of relationships essential for participation mystique individuals during the integration process. Type 1. The grounded witness. Someone who isn't dissolved themselves, who has strong boundaries but deep compassion, who can be present with your intensity without absorbing it or rejecting you. Jung wrote, the participation mystique individual needs at least one relationship with a person who remains firmly individuated. This person doesn't try to fix you or rescue you. They simply witness your process without merging with it. One patient described her grounded witness. She could sit with me during emotional storms without becoming the storm. Her calm didn't invalidate my intensity. It held space for it. This might be a therapist, a mentor, a friend who has done their own deep work. Someone who can stay present without getting swept away. Type 2, the fellow traveler, someone else with dissolved boundaries who has learned to manage it. Not to commiserate about suffering, but to share techniques, support integration, normalize the experience. Jung organized what might be called the first support groups for participation mystique individuals. He found that when 2 people with dissolved boundaries worked together on integration, they progressed faster than in isolation. There's something powerful about being seen by someone who truly understands. Who doesn't need you to explain why crowds are unbearable or why you know things you shouldn't know. Who can say, yes, I feel that too, and mean it literally. Type 3. The limiting structure. A therapist, teacher, or guide who provides external boundaries while yours are developing. Jung noted, temporary dependence on external structure is not weakness. It's developmental necessity. Think of this like training wheels. While you're learning to create internal boundaries, you need external ones. Regular sessions with a skilled practitioner provide temporal structure, physical boundaries, energetic containment. This isn't about becoming dependent. It's about having a safe container while you build your own. Now let me tell you who you really are, beyond the suffering, beyond the confusion, beyond the years of feeling like you didn't belong. You are not damaged. Your dissolved boundaries are not a malfunction. They're an evolutionary remnant of shamanic consciousness. You're not too sensitive for this world. You're psychologically ahead of it. The work isn't to shut down your perception. It's to develop a container strong enough to hold it. Jung spent decades studying this because he lived it himself. He experienced the terror of dissolved boundaries during his Red Book period. He felt like he was losing his mind. But what he was actually doing was mapping the territory between conscious and unconscious reality. And he left us the path, from participation mystique to integrated consciousness, from victim to sacred function. His message was clear: you were born to feel everything, not to suffer, but to serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious reality. But first, you must learn to contain your own intensity. Then develop boundaries that are conscious, not reactive. Then integrate the shadow material you've been avoiding. Only then can participation mystique become what it was always meant to be: a sacred function in service of collective consciousness evolution. This is what Carl Jung empath research reveals at its core. Sensitivity is not pathology. It's potential waiting for integration. You are doing exactly what your nervous system evolved to do. You're sensing invisible currents, feeling collective movements, picking up on what most people miss entirely. But you're doing it in a world that forgot how to honor that role. A world that has no rituals for cleansing what you absorb, no containers for protecting you while you serve, no language for the bridge you're meant to be. So your work, your sacred work, is to remember, to integrate what was dissolved, to serve from choice, not compulsion, to become the consciousness mediator Jung knew you could be. In ancient cultures, you would have been the medicine person, the seer, the one who felt into the invisible and brought back guidance. You would have been trained, protected, honored. Modern society doesn't offer that. So you must create it yourself through the four-stage integration process, through finding your essential relationships, through patient shadow work and boundary development. When you complete this journey, you stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "How can I serve with this?" Your sensitivity becomes discernment. Your absorption becomes conscious witnessing. Your suffering becomes wisdom. And the gift that nearly destroyed you becomes the very thing that allows you to help others navigate their own darkness. This is personal development at the soul level, not about becoming someone else, but about integrating all of who you already are. Jung wrote, "Light that knows itself as light." That's what you're becoming. Conscious of your very love, loving and remaining awake, feeling and still knowing you're feeling. Not everyone who feels much is an empath. A true empath is one who keeps consciousness amid an ocean of emotion. That's the rare trait that separates you from everyone else. Not the intensity of feeling, but the capacity to remain conscious within that intensity. To feel everything and not be destroyed by it. To love deeply and not lose yourself. To sense the invisible currents and translate them into wisdom others can use. The world is learning from you how to feel without fear. Love without loss, shine without pride. You're showing what's possible when sensitivity meets consciousness. You are not broken. You are an undifferentiated perceiver in a world that forgot how to honor that role. But Jung left us the map, the recognition and inventory, the boundary visualization, the shadow integration, the sacred function. And now you're not walking it alone. There are others like you finding their way through the same terrain, recognizing themselves in these patterns, beginning the integration work. If you're a Type 2 or Type 4 participation mystique individual, drop a comment. I want to know which type resonates most. Share the moment you first recognized you were different. The moment you realized you weren't broken, just undifferentiated. I'm creating a deeper video on Jung's specific boundary techniques and shadow integration practices, the exact visualization exercises he used with patients, the questions that reveal hidden shadow material, the daily practices that develop conscious permeability, If this video helped you understand why crowds drain you, why you absorb others' emotions, why you've always felt like an emotional antenna, subscribe for more Jungian psychology that explains your lived experience. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not failing at being human. You're a bridge between worlds, learning to walk between conscious and unconscious reality without being destroyed by either one. Jung left us the map, and we're walking it together. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.